So, we're moving through, if you remember, I shared about, we're moving through some of the heroes that Jesus had. The real Jesus, you know, the guy that walked around, the dissident. And his heroes came from a book that we call the Old Testament, but it's really the Hebrew Scriptures, and it's always been the Hebrew Scriptures. We've spoken about Ruth, and last week about my focus. What am I focused on? And today I'm going to move to Joseph. Joseph, and I want to talk about my perception. Now Joseph, we all know Joseph. I mean, we all know him. He was a dreamer, and he was an interpreter of dreams. But I want to tell you, we're talking about their story is our story. Her story is my story. His story is my story. So when you hear me teach about these prophets, these heroes, these sheroes from history, it's our story. And Joseph represents in us our highest perception of truth. Truth with a capital T, not truth that shifts and bends and changes. The ultimate spiritual, divine truth that is implanted in each one of us for our lives. And I believe Joseph is one of the best examples of how the mind of spirit expresses itself in our life. The spiritual mind in expression. It's that Joseph part of us, that dreamer part of us. But a dreamer is not enough, because we need to be willing enough to interpret the dream and then take some action. And so if Joseph represents our perception, why is that important? It's important because our perception molds our imagination. And our imagination is truly our power to image. We create images in our mind. And one of the surest ways that a man or a woman can open themselves up to the inflow of spirit in our life is to pay attention to our dreams. What are we passionate about? To follow that guidance in us that at times makes no sense whatsoever. You see, divine ideas, God ideas, spiritual ideas, they're always being reflected upon what we call our mind, our consciousness, our awareness. Many of them come as fleeting thoughts, and we forget them far too quickly, or we dismiss them far too easily. But it is the Joseph quality of our consciousness that will meditate patiently and persistently upon these divine ideas, upon these dreams, and then actually take some action, make some decisions, let go of what's not working, embrace what is working. And Joseph is that part of us that can stand in the gap. The gap between what seems to make sense, what doesn't make sense. The gap between the dream and the fruition of the dream. That moment where you know, we have this dream of a degree and we're piled up with papers and the final exam is, you know, Tuesday, and we didn't even do our cites for the APA format, and the list goes on and on and on. There's this gap that just wants to throw in the towel. You know, it's like that in relationships. It's like that in our jobs. It's like that in every area of our life. There are always those gap moments. And Joseph is that ability to stand in the gap. And let me tell you why that's very important and why that shows up in our life. Because things are first ideas. Things are whatever the thing is, it's a first idea. Okay? And ideas are filtered through our perception. We all have air conditioners at home, central air conditioning, right? Don't change the filter. And watch how the house does not cool off. It's because the perception, the filter, needs to be cleaned every month so that the air can circulate. Ideas circulate the same way in our mind. If our perception is clouded with the past, is clogged with yesterday, the God ideas do not flow freely in our life. And it's time to change the filter. It's time to change our perception. Why is perception important? Because an experience that we have is created when our perception responds to an idea. Our perception responds to an idea. Our perception responds to an idea. Many of us have a negative perception of ourselves and our abilities. It wasn't God that gave us that negative perception. It may have been life, it may have been our childhood, it may have been past experiences, it may have been times we tried something and it didn't work out. Whatever it is, our perception, our filter, has accumulated this thought that we are not enough. And so we get an idea to go back to school. We get an idea for a relationship. We get an idea to start a business. We get an idea. And that perception doesn't allow it to flow into our life. And so ideas filtered through our perception create our experiences. Leonardo da Vinci says something wonderful. He says, all knowledge is the offspring of our perception. You see, because we really don't know anything. It's our perception that tells us we think we know something. But since we all have different backgrounds and different lives and different experiences and different pasts, we can all look at the same thing and perceive a very different idea. So let's get back to Joseph. Joseph. You know, I know Joseph. I was born into slavery. I was actually sold into it by my angry brothers. I was the favorite son of my dad and my mom, and my brothers, they were not happy of it. And so one day, you know, while I was checking up on them, because my dad always used me to report on what my brothers were doing. All right, and one day while I was checking up on them, you know, they threw me into a pit. And it was in this pit that I was taken out of and sold to Ishmaelites. And I was brought to Egypt. I didn't plan on going to Egypt that day. I was just going to spy on my brothers to give my dad the heads up on what they were doing. Well, then I woke up from that trauma, and I found myself in Egypt. And I was sold to a man named Potiphar. And right out of the pit, I was brought into this man's palace. And I never complained, and I never moaned, and I never groaned. And whatever I was put through, whether I was in the pit or whether I was in the palace, I always looked for the good and did my best. And you know, I was even like so good at what I did, and I looked so good, that this brother's wife, you know, wanted me. But I was honest to myself, and I was true to myself, and I was true to my God, and I refused to take part in an extramarital affair. I refused to submit to her advances. I refused to sell the highest idea in the mind of God that I believed was true for me for this woman and her advantage. And so what does she do? She sets me up. She sets me up with false testimony. And when I rejected her advance, she grabs my shirt and she screams and screams and screams, and all the palace guards come. And she tells them I tried to rape her. And so Potiphar, my boss, my owner, the man of the house, comes home. And he puts me in prison. And then let me tell you something about that prison. That prison, I didn't know it at the time. That prison was preparing me for something greater. That prison was teaching me patience. And it is this patience that opens up my perception. See, when life shows up, probably what Joseph teaches us is to keep our mouth closed and keep our mind open. Too often it's the other way around. We close our mind and open our mouth. Oh, look what they did to me. Look what she did to me. That woman, she's a liar. That dog, ba, 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 ba. We just go on and on and on, just shoot off our mouth. Well, our mind is completely closed. But Charles Fillmore, Unity's co-founder, says, if we patiently bide our time, knowing that only good can come to us, knowing that only good can come to us. Say that, knowing that only good can come to me. Even the seemingly imprisoned moments will prove their God-given power. We know this story. This isn't some ancient Hebrew story. Did you ever hear of a guy named Nelson Mandela? It's a real life. He's a real man. God put him in a prison in South Africa for 27 years to prepare him to be president of that country. You know, it's this great theme for today is even when it appears that we're overcome by errors and by something outside of us, we can still remain true to high ideas. It's our perception. It is not something forced upon us. We can actually choose the highest idea in the mind of God through our perception, no matter what the situation is. You see, our perception is powerful. It forms ideas and it brings them into manifestation. It comes to conclusions and it actually projects those conclusions onto our life. You see, our perception projects the conclusion that we have come to before the movie even started. And so by faithfully performing those routine duties that are entrusted to us day by day, moment by moment, experience by experience, even in a metaphorical prison, we are certain to perceive a better idea. Our faithfulness has even a greater reward in those trying times, because all the while, a faithful mind, a positive mind, a mind that actually projects a positive perception on the experience, builds itself to be firmer, truer, and more godlike in that situation. See, this is the enduring reward of faithfulness. It moves us into possession of the true riches of life, which is a spiritual consciousness. Because I don't care if the issue is financial, if it's relationship, if it's health, if it's the church, if it's my job, if it's my family, I don't care. A spiritual consciousness is more valuable than a material understanding of the situation. More value will be put out when we look at every situation in our life through a spiritual perception than a material perception. Why? Because material, by definition, is always limited. Spiritual, by definition, is always expansive and infinite. You know, the Hebrew meaning of the name Joseph is one who increases. One who increases. One who increases. That's why I say there's a Joseph part of our mind. But all too often, do we increase the positive or do we increase the negative? I will tell you, it is our perception is that which increases whatever we hold in our mind. It can increase good more than anything else in our life, our perception. You know, and unfortunately it's true. Sometimes we act as if a painful moment is going to last a lifetime. We put on this victim perception. And we want everybody in the world to see us as a victim. But what's happening is we're projecting a victim onto the very experience that we want to be freed from. And in this acting as if the painful moment is eternal, what do? We catch ourselves complaining. And then the next response from this victim perception is we do anything we can to avoid the pain. We do anything we can. We'll make excuses. We'll completely lie to ourselves simply to avoid the discomfort. And when we do this, we think. We are perceiving that we avoid agony. But Ralph Waldo Emerson, in his essay Experience, says, our life is never so much threatened as our perception. See, in those moments, we're threatening our perception that's keeping us comfortable. Are you with me? Okay. Are you with me? Yes. Okay, because in those moments, this is so important. We think, we're perceiving that it's the safe and good and wonderful thing to do, when in effect, irony shows us what's happening is the delay of the trial, the delay of moving through the experience is exactly what's producing the confusion and resistance that shows up in our life. If we were just perceive ourselves move through it, then the discomfort will be far less overwhelming. But in avoiding this discomfort, in projecting this victimness, what we're doing is creating the energy that keeps building up the confusion. In that moment, perception is our choice, but we have to wake ourselves up and say, perception is my choice. Because far too often we don't recognize it. See, we can rely on truth with a capital T, eternal, enduring, everlasting truth, as we discussed last week. Where the God idea is, I will go. Where the blessing is, I will live. Where the God idea is, I will go. Where my blessing is, I will live. Where do we live? It's in our mind. These are perceptions. And in the moments where we try and shift an old victim-like perception to a perception that creates and attracts victory in our life, detours show up. Shifts show up. Shift, S-H-I-F-T. Just thought I'd clarify that. Shifts show up. But these detours, they're going to show up because we're seeing our life from a new perception. The detour is actually a roundabout way to get to the same destination that we wanted. What is the destination? Prosperity, health, love, abundance, peace, joy. You fill in the destination that's on your mind. The destinations are those prayer requests we pray over. And so a detour is really only a deviation that teaches us or prepares us for something greater than the destination we even thought of. And it's important in those moments when we're confused, when we're feeling like a victim, that remember, the detour always leads us to exactly where we are supposed to be. The destination of God, or the highest idea in the mind of God, never changes. What changes is the path we take to get there, because there is something on that path. You know, I was at my graduation, not my graduation, my school's graduation, University of Fort Lauderdale, and Friday night was graduation service. And so I show up just to be there and to give myself a little charge, because I'm halfway there. Literally 35 out of 71 credits, and I'm ready. Oh my God, am I ready to graduate? Let me tell you, I'm ready. And the speaker was a gentleman named Willie Gary. And I don't know if you know about Willie Gary, but Willie Gary in Forbes magazine is one of the top 50 attorneys in the United States. And Willie Gary told a Joseph story, and I thought it was perfect, because we all think that trials or tribulation or people or places or things have power to destroy us. And so Willie Gary, he grows up somewhere, somewhere, I think it was Stewart or Port St. Lucie. And he's an African-American guy, and he's probably about, 10 or 20 years older than me. So he grew up in a very different world. And his first job, he was a dishwasher at this hotel. I think it was called the Pelican Hotel. And he was a dishwasher, and there were two men there. And one man was the landscaper, and his name was Bill. And he said he was always very nice and very encouraging to him. Always like, go to school, you can do it. I know it's tough and everything. And the other man was a dock master and was just verbally abusive to him all the time. And so the story makes sense. Willie Gary is an African American, and these two men, the landscaper and the dock master, are white men. And so the landscaper is always supportive and encouraging to him. The dock master is always racist, calling him the N-word, throwing stuff really rude and demoralizing to him. And so he follows his dream, Mr. Gary. He goes to school, puts himself through school, goes to law school, gets a law degree, gets licensed in the state of Florida. Well, I'm telling you, Willie Gary has had, from what I understand, over 250 verdicts or settlements in excess of $1 million. Okay? I mean, he has taken on the biggest corporations in America and won in trials. Like I say, he's one of the top 50 attorneys in Forbes magazine. Well, lo and behold, the way Spirit works is one day the Pelican Hotel comes up for sale. And so, it's on a bidding market, or he bids on it and stuff, and Mr. Gary and his wife put in a bid to purchase it, and they get to purchase it. And so he shows up the day after he has the deed in his hand to the same hotel he washed dishes at. And guess who still works there? And the landscaper, the dock master and the landscaper. So the landscaper, he's walking up onto his new hotel, and the landscaper is like, oh, sir, 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 and all like shaking. He's like, what's the matter? He's like, I need this job, and my children, my grandchildren, please don't fire me. Da, da, da. Now, he doesn't even remember that this is the young brother that he used to encourage, 30 whatever years ago. And he looks at the guy, Bill, the landscaper, and he's like, well, I really was thinking of changing your job. And the guy is like, what? He's like, how would you like to be dock master? Now, you got to understand, if you know anything about a waterfront hotel, one of the most elite jobs in the hotel is the dock master. And probably one of the not-so-elite jobs is a landscaper, I would imagine. So he's offering the guy who was a landscaper there for 20, 30, X amount of years, would you like to be my new dock master? And so the guy is so like, yes, yes. He's like, okay, I have your first job assignment. Go and fire the dock master. Okay? Life has a way. When you have the faith, when you're positive, when you stand in truth, of working things out. One of the most difficult things for our human nature is to step back, be still, and be the best that we can be. Amen. Did you hear that? Because, we want to go in and fix it. We want to go in and prove our point. Joseph's story is our story. It's Willie Gary's story. It's Nelson Mandela's story. It's Ed Bissono's story. It's my story. It's all of us who have a dream of being something more, where we have to release the idea that we're something less. You see, I can see things different than my brothers saw them. Let these words be your words. I have visions. I have dreams, and I'm able to interpret those dreams to move me through today. Spirit in me always reveals my ability to image something. Every day, every moment, every experience, I'm imaging something in my mind. And so I want to pay attention to those images. I want to perceive higher ideals for myself. When I was 17, I had two dreams. One dream was about harvesting grain in the field. Another dream is about the sun and the moon and the stars in the sky. You see, the first dream was about the fields of my life and what I was going to collect. The second dream about the sun and the moon and the stars represented my visions of how I was going to see myself. In spite of many difficulties, I eventually rose to be the Prime Minister of Egypt. And I must tell you, this was not in my dream. All the dreams showed me was a vision. It showed me just enough to encourage me, but it didn't show me everything. It didn't show me that I was going to have a position of influence in what was then the greatest and largest country in the world. See, my dream didn't show me from this position of influence I was going to be able to feed my entire family. My dream didn't show me that it was going to be those same brothers that threw me in the pit, that I was going to have the opportunity to forgive them and feed them. But what I realized is what they meant for evil, God meant for good. I learned to work in harmony with Spirit inside myself, to acknowledge the Spirit in me, and to speak the word of power and intention. I gave no power to the experiences of my life. No matter what the misfortune, whether I was thrown in a pit, whether I was sold into slavery, whether I was unjustly accused, thrown into prison for a crime I never committed, I allowed every one of those experiences to be a stepping stone to a greater height for me. And it is written over and over and over again, through all of this, God was with me. God is with me is an affirmation we can say at every experience, no matter what is going on outside. For when we realize that God in us is the true source of our power, we rise above adversity. We don't run from detours, we run through them. So my brothers and sisters, let this week begin with the knowledge that God in us is the source, is the solution. That God in us is an infinite source of power. Let the moment of confusion, when it shows up, simply be a sign for us, a calling for us to pay attention to what is our perception. May we be strong enough to, at the moment of confusion, ask ourselves the question, what do I perceive? And may our imagination perceive a bigger picture for ourselves. Let us agree that the highest and best is waiting for each one of us in the dream of our mind, and let us interpret every experience. You see, my perception is no longer a prison. My perception is the palace in my mind. Truth is universal. My perception of truth is not. And so today, surrounded by my brothers and sisters here in this church, I declare I am free from the prison of lack and limitation. I take my place in the perception of one who has influence. I recognize I have influence in all that I do, and in using my influence, all of life's resources are under my dominion. And I invite you to do the same. God bless you. Amen. God bless you. Amen.